All right, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Ricky Tugg, University of Florida, and I am very pleased to have this meeting together with us on this Monday, March the 28th. Erica Earlbeck is going to be leading us in a panel discussion with the title Reviewing with the Author in Mind. And so, as is the case with every time that we get together on a monthly basis for the Society of Agricultural Communication Scholars, we have, in this case, Erica leading us in discussion on this topic. And then at the end, if there's time allowed, we'll have some time for people to talk about what's going on in their programs or any announcements that you'd like to make as well. So usually what we do is we allow the webinar presenter to let us know whether you would want to have questions throughout or at the end. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Erica. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We'll address those at the end. So one thing that before I kick this over to the panel, I have just a couple of reminders as far as submitting, and we're going to keep our comments pretty well focused in the Journal of Applied Communications, but I think a lot of this applies to everything. But first I'm going to go through what the journal asks for, or the guidelines for submitting, and then I've got a little poll to kind of get the conversation going on this. So first I want to share my screen with you so that you all can see and know that the information for authors for the Journal of Applied Communications is on the website. So, sometimes you do feel like you get a toxic review and or something that's, no, toxic is a strong word, unkind. But think about this, like, are you submitting to the journal and are you submitting manuscripts that are what the journal asks for, first of all? So, is this information that you're submitting a fit for the Journal of Applied Communications? Next, have you followed the submission format? And that's one thing that as a reviewer, I like to see that people can follow instructions. So please follow the instructions that have been provided on the website. And all of this is here. Information for reviewers is on here. And as a reviewer, please explain, like if you're going to deduct points from the evaluation, explain why. Don't just deduct points because and because how is that manuscript going to get better if you don't explain why you're choosing to not accept that? So yeah, just make sure and make sure that this is a building process, not a tearing down process. Okay, at this time I'm going to use a little poll from Mentimeter. And I have some, okay, give me some head nods. Can everybody see this, the instructions on screen? Okay, excellent, thank you. All right, so please go to menti.com and here's the code, or if you would prefer to just use your phone, you can just do the QR code right there. So I'll give y'all a moment to do this. Kind of fun little poll to get conversation going here. And this is a little website that I use in class frequently. I have in my intro to AgCom class, I have a group of non-talkers, so I can use this and it gets, at least they share their opinions through this. Okay, I'm going to move forward with this in about 10 seconds. So please join if you can. All righty, so my first question for you all, what's the most helpful comment or advice a reviewer has provided for you? And just to prime the well, one of the most helpful things that I have seen in a review, if you're going to include something, if you're going to include a link back to literature in your conclusions, you need to have that literature stated in your review of literature. I think that was a nice piece of advice, and I try to do that with everything I submit. Share the purpose of the paper early in the introduction. I love that. Good. I like to see the purpose early in the paper as well. Sometimes you kind of bury the lead. Specific references if I've missed something. Yes, good. Constructive criticism, specific statements related to how and why I could improve the manuscript. Excellent. Suggestions for another way to examine the data or a conclusion discussion I didn't notice. That's great. Yeah, that's always very helpful. That's when you know they've really read it. Page and line numbers for specific errors. Oh, yes, yes. Like you had a typo on page 5. Where? Yes, I love that one. Specific feedback on structure of the literature review. Good. Maybe not the best thing, but advice about references being inconsistent. That's good. That shows that they really looked at it. Not make statements or opinion unless it's cited. Otherwise, it's your opinion. Good. Suggested the needed changes and edits. Positive encouragement and specific comments, out-of-date sources, illogical intro with examples of mismatched logic. Good. Suggestion of an article to consider. Oh, I love it when they do that. Write an active and not passive voice. Expand on explanation. Yeah, a lot of us were trained in journalism, so we were writing a little too concisely. Good, thank you all for participating. All right, next one. What's the most hurtful comment someone has left for you? And just as y'all are typing, I'll prime the well here. One of them was, it seems as if an undergraduate wrote this manuscript. Thanks. And this one wasn't terribly long ago. Hurtful, ugly, tacky. There are lots of words that we can use, descriptors in there. One that just angered you the most, perhaps. This appears to be a pilot test. Okay. You didn't find a value in the work. This is awkward. Okay. Maybe more specific, because sometimes wording is awkward. So yes, awkward wording. Be a little more specific. Ooh, qualitative research isn't research. I'll fight you for that one. I don't see how this is impactful. Thanks. Do we have any others? That's it. There we go. This doesn't contribute to the discipline. Thanks. Thanks, friend. Okay, I'll move us along there. As a reviewer, what general areas would make you reject a manuscript? So I'm trying to get at what are, and just kind of, this is a little fun little poll here, like what are your big key areas? First, these are just the orders that I threw these into Mentimeter, but you can go in and rearrange the order. What's your big thing? So, you know, if it doesn't fit the scope of the journal, you're automatically going to reject, or the introduction doesn't capture your attention. Problem, purpose, research, weak theoretical framework, questionable methodology, flimsy findings, weak conclusions or recommendations. So what's the thing that makes you your big thing? Questionable methodology. Good. It's like the methodology is the big thing. And that's good to know, because sometimes I probably spend too much time on the introduction when I'm writing stuff. So good. Cool. Thank you all. I might just make a poster out of this. No. Out of 8 or 9 responses, 10 responses. There we go. But it looks like methodology is the most important thing. So making sure that that methodology is clearly written, clearly the old saying about a recipe, could you replicate this study? Is the methodology described in a way that you could replicate this study if you had to do it? And my big thing is it doesn't fit the scope of the journal. Like that's kind of my big thing that I look for and would do an auto reject on. Good. Okay, thank you all. That's the conclusion of that. And now I'm going to stop sharing. And now I have asked several people to contribute to our panel discussion, our panel of experts. Is Dr. Miller on here? I don't see him on here. Okay. Well, we do have Dr. Specht and Dr. Myers. We have two people who have served or are currently serving in the editor role in the Journal of Applied Communications. So I have several questions that I'm going to ask you, and so I'll go through those, and then at the end, if you all have some questions, I would like to turn that over to the group to ask some questions of our panelists. So we'll start with the first question. What's one thing you wish every author would keep in mind before submitting?
I'm going to defer to Courtney to go first on a lot of these because I am somewhat new to this. I have some thoughts, but I'd like to hear what she shares first.
My end says that you are not muted.
You might want to check which microphone you have.
Yeah, which mic input. Okay, Annie, would you mind going ahead and while she troubleshoots that?
Sure.
Okay.
I mean, again, it's really an honor to be here. I've been the managing editor of the Journal of Applied Communications for about 2 months now. So, you know, not speaking from a host of experience, but I think that there have been a couple of things that I've noticed as I've looked through kind of the first round of submitted manuscripts and the first round of reviews. And I think, you know, the poll that you just shared, Erica, was really telling. You know, I think the first thing you need to think about is this the right fit for this research? Does this research belong, or I should say research or commentary or professional development paper, does it fit the scope of the Journal of Applied Communications? Is this the right venue for it? And so I think that honestly, before you do anything else, before you hit submit on your submission, really kind of do a little bit of soul searching and think about, is this the right venue for this particular piece? And if not, where else might you want to send it?
Let me try it now.
We
Yay.
gotcha.
All right. Thanks, y'all. Bear with. So Annie's right. I would say that some of the things that Erica pointed out on the website are things that we try to do as the editorial team before we send it to a reviewer. So we do try to see if it has met the formatting guidelines and if it fits the scope of the journal. Now, if it's questionable, where it's like, well, that's not really in my line of research, but somebody else might find that relevant, then I'll probably go ahead and send that out for a review. But if the formatting isn't correct, y'all, I'm kicking that back. Like, I'm not going to waste a reviewer's time. Yeah, I mean, you don't need to do that. So most of the times that I would desk reject was just simply because they hadn't followed those guidelines. And sometimes and I would usually say, hey, I'm going to desk reject it so it's not in the queue. If you go and make these changes, we can put it back into consideration. But Annie's point about does it fit the scope of the journal? If you're not sure, ask before you submit it. That way it's, we get inquiries from a lot of different places about the fit, and it's easy for me to kind of glance through it or see like a preliminary, purpose and research objectives and say, okay, yes or no, that's not something that our review team would be able to critique and doesn't really fit our journal. The other thing, and Erica, sorry, I don't have my questions. I wrote a few notes, but one other thing I'd like everyone to know when you're submitting to Jack and getting reviews back is that almost all papers are accepted with major revisions if they're accepted. So we have multiple levels within Jack. One is just to reject, sorry, it doesn't work, it's not going to be workable. Then we have accept with major revisions, which allows us to keep the paper active in the review system. It allows us to send it back to the reviewers, even if it's just one reviewer who asks for a lot of those revisions. So you might get a review back and go, oh, major revisions. And in reality, it wasn't that much. But if we don't leave it at that level, we can't send it back to the review team. So we need to leave it at that level. Once it hits accept with minor revisions, only the executive editor is looking at that in that stage. So I guess don't get disheartened if you get accept with major revisions. All that does is allow us to get it back to the reviewers for that extra little oversight, and it may not be all that major after all.
Thank you for telling us that. I did not know that's what it meant. To me, it means this needs major work. So yes, I'm so glad you said that. Thank you. Okay, so next question. In your experience as an editor for Jack, what would you like to see a reviewer include when they provide feedback? And as authors, we've all gotten that one where there's just the score and no feedback at all. But as the editor, what do you like to see? What helps you?
So I'll jump in here. As reviewers, you get the opportunity to leave comments for the author and a secret little note for the editor. I want the secret note. I want you to pass me a note that says, overall, this is what I think of this paper. I really want them to work on this part of it or this part of it. Then when I would send back the reviewer decision, I could say, as you'll see, we've said accept with major revisions. However, if you'll notice, reviewer one has noted they really just want more literature or more current sightings, or they want you to, switch your objectives to questions, whatever the case is. That helps me out so much as an editorial team member. The other thing for reviewers, that y'all have mentioned the line numbers. That is so helpful, isn't it? I mean, it is. I know it's hard, but man, the best reviews were the ones that said on line 90, you said this, I think you meant this, or can you add, whatever the case is. The other thing you can do is hard copy edit on the PDF or add, comments within the PDF and scan that in and give it back to the authors. So that's as a reviewer, as an author, I always appreciated it when the reviewers clearly pointed out where that typo was. So I could focus more energy on the more substantive changes that the paper needed.
So I'll piggyback off of some of Courtney's points and reiterate the helpfulness of that cover letter that you as reviewers turn back in with a review. And I will tell you, I will tell everyone on this call, I was guilty of being that person who's like, here's 2 sentences, I reviewed this, here are my overall thoughts, because I don't think I had a full awareness of what it was that cover letter was intended for. And so, you know, kind of being on the other side of it from an editorial standpoint, that cover letter is, as Courtney indicated, is really valuable for giving us a quick snapshot of what it is really needs to be worked on in the manuscript, especially when you see recurring things between reviewers. That just makes the entire sort of turning back the revision process so much easier for us as the editors, because we have, in a quick glance, we're able to give some pretty substantive feedback. You know, one of the things that has been challenging, I think, and has been challenging for all of us is timeliness of reviews. I'm going to be that person who says, you know, we have expectations as editors of how quickly we can get reviews back for the authors. And there's nothing more nerve-wracking than sitting and waiting for reviews for multiple weeks or even months. And so I think, you know, when you get that invitation to review, and you're given the option to accept or decline the review, if you accept that review, we really love if you get those reviews back relatively quickly, because then the authors just don't sit in a mild panic for multiple weeks trying to figure out what in the world they're supposed to be working on. So, you know, reiterating the importance of that cover letter, obviously using line numbers and being really specific in your feedback when it's possible. And then also just being as timely as you possibly can. And I will, again, be the first person to say, I was not always like that as a reviewer. As an editor, I am kicking myself for being the person who was always the problem child.
It's karma, Annie.
It probably all do us some good to be in the conference chair or editor role at some point, so that we realize what y'all deal with. So yes. Okay, share some examples, and just generally speaking, of a good constructive review.
And Annie, I'm struggling. I wish Jeff was here today, because I haven't been in the managing editor role for 2 years, well, a year and a half or so. So I'm trying to reflect back to when I would be reading all of those. One thing, I think we all like to read what we did well, right? But sometimes reviewers get bogged down and they have a lot of things on their mind. And so I guess don't take it to heart if all they focus on are the things you need to correct. The best reviews that I would see as a managing editor are the ones that helped the authors realize where they had done really well and where there were areas to improve. And one thing to always just kind of keep in mind is when I would read those good constructive reviews, they were trying to encourage additional clarity or additional understanding of the work that you've already done. And so, you know, the constructive reviews are the ones that are written in a manner that help you identify what you did well, but also areas that you can improve so that others can benefit from that.
Absolutely.
With line numbers, right? Including line numbers.
With line numbers they're included in the submission for a reason. Let's put it that way. We had a review that came back fairly recently that I was reading through and was just floored by the level of care that this reviewer had taken. And honestly, so far, I will say, shameless plug, y'all have done very well. Like I feel like this field is probably better and more supportive than some others, but this one really stood out to me. And I think they did exactly what Courtney indicated. They really focused on, I think this manuscript has a lot of promise. You know, here are the things that really stood out to me as things that you did well, but then they were really careful and really detailed in their feedback on areas that they thought the authors could improve the manuscript. I think one thing that can kind of help soften the blow a little bit of that critical feedback is mentioning, you know, instead of saying you were wrong about this or you did this incorrectly, you know, kind of indicating, well, I think you were heading in this direction, but you kind of got sidetracked over here. And basically, you know, trying to ascribe some level of positive intent on the author's part instead of just blatantly saying you did this wrong or this was bad. I think this is what you meant. I think this was where you were going, but here's how you might want to reconsider it. I've seen reviewers who have submitted specific references that they thought that the authors might have missed, which has been really helpful, especially if you're looking at a theoretical framework and there's some seminal work missing in that theoretical framework. It can be really helpful to have, at least authors' names of other studies that they might want to take a look at. And I think the ones that make specific connections between the different sections of the manuscript. Here's what you said in your introduction. Here's what you said in your literature review, but here's where that sort of gets a little bit sidetracked in the conclusions. So again, ascribing that intent of the author was on the right track. Here's where you might have gotten sidetracked a little bit, as opposed to the blatant, this was terrible, you need to throw this all out. Because as Courtney said, when you get a revise and resubmit, you get a revise and resubmit because the reviewers think that there's merit there. Sometimes it just takes a little bit more work to get that teased out.
Awesome, thank you. So I'm sure you both have seen some comments that are really more hateful than helpful. What are some examples of that? And the group shared some of their ideas, but you may have seen some come across your desk that you're like, that was ugly.
Yeah, I really can't agree with that. I don't remember seeing anything that was not provided in, sometimes they're short, sometimes they're brief, and maybe it's just been too long for me to remember that, but I don't remember ever reading a review that was like, they didn't get enough chocolate last night. That's rough. So I don't know if Annie's seen anything like that yet. And I think we all take things personally that maybe weren't intended that way. And it just comes across that way. I'll admit, this is awkward comment earlier. I have probably left that on someone's paper because I can't think of a better way to say, I don't really understand what you were going to say here. Instead, I said, this is awkward. And I didn't mean it hurtfully or harmfully. It's just as a reviewer, it's just a lot. So I can't think of a time that I was like, this is crossing the line. To be honest with you all, as an editor, I don't assign reviews to people that aren't going to put some effort into it. And so, yeah, I can't think, and I'm sure you all can say, well, I got this and somebody said this on mine, and I'm sorry if that's you.
I think the closest in the couple of months I've been in this role, the closest that I've seen a review come to being sort of blatantly disrespectful is the old nugget of, here's how I would have done the study. Is someone blatantly saying, well, this is an area that I research in, and spoiler alert, if y'all haven't realized this, in a lot of cases, the reason you get assigned certain papers is because of the research area or specialization you've indicated. So there's a valid reason why you're getting assigned those manuscripts. But we had one that, the reviewer kind of restated how they would have undertaken the research from the get-go. And I was like, well, that's not particularly helpful because the research has been conducted and there's only so much that you can do at this point. And so that was, I think, as close to blatant disrespect that we got, that I've seen in a review. And I think it's less about being sort of hurtful and just more about being, kind of misunderstanding the purpose of a review. It's not to completely encourage the team to go out and throw out what they've done and redo everything, because that's usually not feasible. But, just it's not particularly helpful to say, I would have done the entire study this way, and you're wrong if you did it this way. And the reviewer didn't even say that, but they were quite verbose in their thoughts about how the research should have been conducted in a way that I don't think was particularly helpful.
I'm glad to see that y'all haven't seen stuff that's just been blatantly ugly, because I think we've all probably gotten one, but it must have been from a different group. So
It's all those conference reviewers.
Yeah, it must be them. Okay, so we've all reviewed papers that are, in our own opinions, not up to the Journal of Applied Communication standards, or maybe to a conference we're reviewing for. And some of those papers are below our standards. Provide some suggestions for ways we could be kind in our comments, but still communicate that the paper is not acceptable in its current form. Maybe there's somebody that's really nice reviewer. What are some of those ways that they say those things that are like, this really, this doesn't work?
I mean, I really tried to be that person before I sent it to reviewers when I was in the managing editor role. So I tried, if I thought that the paper had merit, but there were some things that just stuck out to me. I would usually say things like, in the past, our reviewers have specifically indicated if you will add those details to this manuscript, you'll have more success in the review process. So I tried really hard to catch those before they went out. Annie, I don't know if you've had one of those yet in the review. Like, I'm trying to remember, a lot of times the paper might not be accepted in the review process because of those things that Erica had us rank. Like, I thought maybe there was potential with, does it fit? I'm like, I'm just one person. I don't want to kick it out. But if both the reviewers say this isn't really a good fit and there's some other flaws in it, then yeah. And I mean, I've had papers rejected from Jack. So it's not, I think one thing that we all need to keep in mind is the only time you're not getting papers rejected is when you're not submitting enough. Like, if you're not getting rejected, you might not, and that's probably not a good way to think of it. But I reflect on my childhood riding horses, and I remember some cousins, some boy cousins, not of mine, but they were cousins. One of them was bragging about how he'd never been bucked off a horse. And his cousin said, well, that's because you haven't ridden very much. And so the idea is the more you're putting yourself out there and the more you're working, the chances of you getting rejected once it's probably going to happen. So just don't take that to heart. Just recognize that there's probably another journal out there that's a better fit or more appropriate for the work that you've done. I've gotten off topic a little bit, but I tried as a managing editor to try to head that off from the get-go. And Annie, maybe you've had a chance to read a more recent review that handled it well.
I was going to say we've had a couple of submissions that have come in since I started that clearly, well, one was sort of on the fence of being within the scope of Jack, let's put it that way. And Courtney, I was kind of in that same position of reading through the introduction to the study, reading through the purpose and the research objectives, and trying to get a sense of, is this something that our reviewers are equipped to review? Is this within kind of the purview of what we do in Jack? And on that one, I think they came close enough to the scope of the journal that I went ahead and sent it out. And the reviewers both came back and said, yeah, it kind of leans in our direction, but we really think it's not a great fit for what we do here in the journal. And it had some other structural issues that the reviewers pointed out when they sent it back. And then we had one that I legitimately think that the authors thought that our journal was like a construction systems management journal or something along those lines, because it really it involved some information about technology. And I think it was a technology that wasn't really within the scope of communication technology, let's put it that way. And so that was one where I was like, there's nobody in our field, there's no one in our database who's capable of reviewing this on the merits of the actual research itself. And so my recommendation, I sent it back, that was a desk reject that I sent back to the authors. And I just said, here are some other areas that you might want to look at submitting this manuscript to. And I think if there are ever opportunities where you can specifically say, maybe check out this journal or maybe check out this conference, I think that can help soften the blow of either a desk reject or a rejection by the reviewers, because it was less about the research and the manuscript and just more about whether or not it was applicable to our field.
my last question for you is, what is one thing you wish every reviewer kept in mind while reviewing papers?
I mean, I think, and I have one comment, but I'll answer this one and then let Annie answer. And then Erica, if you have like, what other things would you like to tell us? I mean, I think reviewers, I try to, when I review a paper, I try to think about what would I say if this was my grad student's paper? Like, and y'all, I don't hold a whole lot of punches, but I try to frame it in a way or to be helpful and just recognize that somebody has put a lot of effort into this document and has gone through the trouble to consider publishing it in our journal. And I want to be helpful. Personally, as a reviewer, I try to block off time and just, you know, we all have many other pressing demands on our time. But as a reviewer, I try to block off an hour where I'm just going to focus on this paper and write up some things that I thought about the paper. And I guess that's one thing, all of our reviewers, we ask a lot of them. We, as Annie has said, we really appreciate our reviewers. We need them. We need their commitment and their energy. But sometimes I'd like them to know that if they'll just focus on it, maybe it won't take as long as they thought and they can get the reviews back faster.
I think that's really good advice. You know, I think that's exactly right. You know, it's so helpful to take the time to put out a quality review, especially because if you do that, you're less likely to have to go through another round of revisions anyway. You know, so the richer the feedback you provide, the more likely the next attempt is to be successful. And so I think, you know, we sometimes think, well, I'm going to rush through this review. I'm just going to give some scores, give a decision, and then I'll be done. Well, that probably means that there's going to be another round of revisions if it gets to that point. So the better quality your review is the first time around, the less likely you are to have to see that paper again. So always keep that in mind. You know, I think for me as a reviewer, one of the things that I have found very helpful is, you know, either printing out a hard copy of the manuscript or putting a PDF on my iPad and scribbling on it. I am not someone who is particularly good at just like looking at a Word document and identifying what the issues are. I like to have that sort of like tactile experience of editing or reviewing. And the same thing goes with my graduate students' work. It's like, well, if I'm not printing it out, then I'm probably not doing as good a job of editing as I probably should be. And I think just remembering that at the end of the day, the author or group of authors, they're people who have feelings and who are going to interpret your critical feedback, especially in a way that you didn't always intend. And so, you know, you don't need to handle authors with kid gloves, but you should be kind. I think kind is the best way. You don't have to be nice, but you should be kind in your feedback. So whether that's highlighting, you know, the content that went well, whether that's, you know, providing specific examples as opposed to just saying something's bad and leaving it at that. I think those are the things that really make the review process a lot easier for the folks who are getting reviewed.
Wonderful. That's excellent feedback. Any final thoughts that you would like to add?
Okay, so pro tip. Annie mentioned that the second round of reviews. So you submit your paper, you get back, accept with major revisions. The author works on those major revisions. You should 100% of the time provide a letter that accompanies that submission that says, here's what we did. Reviewer 1 said to do this. I did it. Reviewer 2 said we should do that. And then I had the best ones that have the quickest re-review were the ones who said we added this statement, and they like put the statement in the letter, or they said if they'll look on lines 90 to 95, we have added newer literature or included a recommendation on . So it's tough because you're like working on the reviews and like fixing the things that they've asked you to fix or correct or bolster. As you're doing that, have another document up that says, okay, that they said this, here's how we addressed it. Because that helps Annie, that helps Jeff, that helps the reviewers see what, and sometimes this helps other reviewers learn. If they get this, they get the letter so they can see what the other reviewer was asking you to do. And they can see like, oh, that was a good suggestion. Maybe I'll keep that in mind for the next review or for my own paper. Like I've learned so much from reading the other reviews. So that's, that was the thing I needed to say, Erica, is don't neglect that letter. It is absolutely crucial.
Awesome. Thank you. Annie, what do you got?
That's, first of all, that's amazing feedback. I've learned so much about the importance of cover letters in the last 2 months. You know, I alluded to this before, you know, thinking about timeliness. We have some guidelines on the website for the expected turnaround time for reviews and for revisions. If you are sent a polite email from myself or from Jeff or from Courtney, and you don't have time to review a paper, let me know. Let us know. Please let us know. I know, you know, my work process is usually spending about 3 hours a week, usually on Friday mornings, going through and taking a look at submissions and looking at reviews and communicating with reviewers and authors. And if you just let that request to review sit, I will harass you for about another week, and then I have to move on. And at that point, we're already 1 or 2 weeks into the review time for that particular manuscript, and we're getting, we're shortchanging the authors in that situation. So if you can't review it, don't forget to decline. Just please decline it or accept it. Those, I think that honestly, that's been my sort of toughest learning curve, is trying to figure out the timing and working with these stale requests that just sort of sit there for a week, and I don't know if the requested reviewer is actually available. And if you forget to do that, you can just email me. My any email you send to to one of those responses comes to my OSU email, and I get it and I will reply. And I appreciate knowing like what timeline you'll be available. And if you're not available for a certain period of time, let us know those things too. If it's a really busy semester, but you're going to have time in the summer, I will keep track of those things, and I will hunt you down in the summer instead of right now. But I think just communicating with the editors, especially about your availability and your timeliness, it just makes our lives that much less stressful and helps us communicate better with the authors as well.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much for your input on that. And at this time, I will toss it back to the group. What questions do you all have for our panelists or for each other? If you're not comfortable turning your mic on, feel free to drop something in the chat, and I'll read it for you. Yeah, this is really great. Thank you very much for this.
So I have a question for those that have done a lot of reviews in their career. As a newer faculty member, I was actually expressing this to somebody else. When I get into, and I've done mostly just reviews for conferences or something, there's definitely this hesitation of, I don't know what it is that I should be looking for because I feel like I'm not qualified. So any tips or like things that newer faculty members can work on to increase the quality of their reviews, whether it is for papers, for conferences, posters, whatever. Any tips on that?
I don't know if it has to be a panel member that answers.
No, anybody can answer.
Well, Lacey, what I'd say is you got a job, so you know what you're doing. So don't get too don't be too humble. You probably know a thing or two. You read enough, you look at other studies enough to kind of know. Usually, I would say focus on the areas that are confusing and ask yourself why. Like, is it because they didn't describe it well? And if it's a methodology you're not as familiar with, you may have to, maybe go, like, sometimes I'll Google things. I'm like, wait, is that the appropriate way? And, just to verify, because I have doubts. I don't have a concrete example other than maybe, you and Shannon get together and review a paper together and see what you found common and where you focused different things on. And that way you can kind of get a sense of what are other people looking at, and maybe you focus on those, or that just one idea. Sorry to throw Shannon in on that, but
it's volunteer, Shannon. No, that's a great thing to, I think, see some other people's insights. It's just nice to see, oh, well, maybe they see something I didn't, or I've never really thought about that before. But yeah, it's definitely when it comes to methodologies that I'm not as familiar with, that's where a lot of it comes in. I'm like, I am not sure. That is not my area. So I do that. I'm like looking at,
you brought up a really good point, and that is within Jack's review database, we try to add keywords, descriptors, and I think hopefully your name has some of those next to it. So when Annie is assigning papers, she might send you more of the critical, qualitative type studies that because she knows that you can give critiques on that. And she might save another type of study for somebody else. So if you're not getting papers that you think you can really comment on or review, let Annie know, because then she can update, what kinds of papers do you want to review? And it's a lot more fun to be a reviewer when you're like, oh, this is cool. This is right up my alley. This is great. I always felt like I knew what was happening because I was reading all these reviews.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome.
Can I join in the conversation here too? And this is part of the whole peer review process, Lacey, is that you don't have to be an expert in everything. Remember that your review is one of 2 or 3 other reviews that are going to go on this paper. So you might be the person who's the methods person, or that you're the person who's the particular expert in the subject. And as we know, communication encompasses a lot of different areas too. So way I've always looked at it is that if there's an area that I may not be the expert on, I'm still kind of knowledgeable about the different areas, but I really focus on those areas that I do know about, and will look for the other reviewer, whoever that person is, to kind of fill in the gaps there too. So, but you know it, you do, I promise you.
I was going to say, and whatever keywords don't show up in the database, because I think Jeff, I don't know how much he's updated the actual ACE reviewer database, but he has a lot of institutional knowledge of who the reviewers are and what their expertise areas are. I found myself Googling y'all just to make sure that I'm assigning reviews to people who, as as Ricky said and as Courtney said, who are experts in at least part of the topic of that particular manuscript. We don't expect everybody to know everything, but there are certain things that that you as a reviewer will be able to speak to that maybe reviewer number 2 will be able to address some other elements for sure. So keep your institutional websites updated too.
I have a question about how much feedback and how much time. So I was recently at a College of Ag meeting, and we had a panel of faculty come in and talk to us about their experience with service. And they go, well, I've spent 8 hours on a paper. And I went, whoa, that's a lot of time. So when you guys are reviewing papers, how much time are you spending? I know Courtney had mentioned an hour, but also how much feedback are you giving, especially for the journal article piece?
Well, I'm going to hop right in here and say 8 hours. I'd be like, reject. Like if it took me 8 hours to review a paper, come on. So I don't know who that was, Laura, but an hour is just me mentally. I can't focus on it more than that. So it may not be done in an hour. But I think one thing, Erica, yeah, not 8 hours. That's right. That's the right answer. I try to, as Annie said, I print it out and I'll try to make comments on it as I go. And then I usually will type those in to the document so that it's, I guess blinded a little bit more when I send it back. Not that anyone can, or they can actually read what I wrote. So sometimes that takes a little bit longer, but yeah, Laura, I'd say if you got assigned a paper and you're finding that you're spending that much time going through it, you need to reach back out to Annie and say, hey, I have some concerns about the quality of the paper and its current stance. Y'all, sometimes the wrong paper version gets sent out. Like if it, especially in the re-review process, if you're re-reviewing a paper and you're like, God, they didn't fix anything. I love that this is recorded and someone might watch this later, but if you're like, why didn't they fix anything? Contact Annie, because seriously, it is a check mark that maybe didn't get unclicked, and they may have the newest version in there. That doesn't answer your original question. I'm eager to see what other people estimate in terms of review length.
I also was like, oh my gosh, 8 hours sounds ridiculous. But hey, that came out of some faculty's mouth in our college.
I might quit. That's how long it took me to review a paper.
Yeah, I'd say definitely not that long either. Courtney's version of 1 hour, that's about all I can provide a break for. If it's a quality paper and there's very little to say, I feel like an hour is good. If there's more to say, I may have to set it down in an hour and then come back to it at another time. But I don't think I've ever reviewed anything for Jack or for a conference that I spent more than 2 hours on a single paper. I mean, we're asked to review a lot for a lot of things. So maybe your faculty friend, Laura, is further along in their career and has some spare time.
It was a hard scientist, I will say that, but it spurred up a conversation in a last review that I did that I was a little distracted, but I sat down and I spent not 8 hours. I probably spent about 2 hours on it, but I'm like, how much feedback is too much feedback and how much are we needing to give to others?
I have a question. If as a reviewer, is it, if you've gone through, you provided your first round of feedback and maybe submitted as a revise and resubmit, and on the second review, hypothetically, if you found information that you didn't catch the first time, how is that like going against standards if there's extra kind of feedback on that second one? Or like if that was us as an author and we got like a whole brand new set of feedback that wasn't in the first one, how do you address that part in the revise and resubmit?
As a reviewer?
Yeah, as a reviewer, like let's say that as you're reading back through it and they've made the changes and there's like a new kind of like area that we missed the first time or something, do you provide that feedback for them if it needs to be another revise and resubmit through a second round? Or because we didn't provide that feedback the first time, is that kind of like null and void, not good practice to provide that again?
I'll try this. I think it depends on what the issue was. I mean, if it's a minor thing, like you missed, someone said awkward sentence structure or whatever, I think it's perfectly fine, to mention that and to do that. But hopefully you caught the major things the first time around and that it was not something new that was introduced the second time. Now, like Courtney said, and that's why I keep my original comments too, because I go through and revise and make edits there too. I have had at least on 2 occasions where the author did not do anything that I had suggested and didn't include anything in the letter that Erica had talked about before. And so I did say, you didn't do what I said the first time around. So again, to me, it really just depends on, and sometimes the author will say, I read what the reviewer said and I disagree. And if they provide with a good explanation, I was like, okay, I'm not going to, I don't necessarily agree, but I can see your point and I go on from there. So I guess it just depends.
The other thing to keep in mind is, Shannon, you're not the only reviewer on the paper. For Jack, typically there's one other one. And then if there's some sort of confusion or argument, we might pull in another reviewer. So that other reviewer may have asked them to do something and you're like, whoa, what is this? But that's where the cover letter helps, folks. Having that cover letter that says reviewer 1 asked me for this, you can read that and you can say, oh, I see that. Or hopefully you're not like, well, that's stupid. I don't know why they would ever ask you to do that. The other thing to keep in mind is that at that stage, at the R&R stage, if you find little things that need tweaked, they can be accepted with minor revisions. And then it's the executive editor's job to make sure that, Shannon, as reviewer two, said, did they do it? I'm going to hold you accountable. So I've asked, when I was in that role last year, I asked people to send me their document with track changes so that I could see just very clearly that they had made all the changes and the updates, and then I accepted them and got it ready to go. So Shannon, I think if that comes up and you're concerned, just reach out to Annie or Jeff and get some clarity.
Awesome. Thank you.
Okay. We have about 2 minutes or so, I think. Maybe have another comment or question folks may have.
I was just going to wrap up my final thought was, we are a small profession, and so let's all agree to build each other up. And the idea from this came from some for this topic came from some graduate students and young faculty members that had experienced some reviews that they felt were very unfriendly, and so that's why we put this together. So there are some people that are feeling like we needed to talk about this. So in the end, let's all just agree to build each other up rather than being ugly in our reviews.
That's great. Yeah, I'll second that too, Erica. I think I'll go back to Lacey's comment or question a minute ago about what do you include. And I think at the bottom line is, when you write your review, how would you want someone to review your paper? What would you say to want to hear from that person? And if you can say, well, I would like for someone to say something kind to me and in my review, then you should probably do the same thing in your review to that person as well. So with that, real quick, Erica's up again next month. She has a topic titled Evaluation Frustration. And I'm I'm looking at some of the comments here. Thank you, all the grad students who are with us today. Please join us next month as well. Hopefully you'll get word about this from your advisors there at your universities. Thank you so much for being here. So the topic's going to be on evaluating programs. And so that'll be the last one for this academic year. And we'll start up again, hopefully in the fall. You'll get some information from me or from some others to carry on with some topics for fall semester as well. I do want to mention for those of you who are part of the mentor-mentee program for our faculty, or maybe you're not. In the email that I sent this morning to let folks know about the presentation today, toward the bottom there is some information if you'd like to participate, or if some things have changed in your academic life, professional life here, about whether you're a mentor or a mentee, or if you're an associate professor or a full professor or what have you. Please feel free to fill out that either email or an online Qualtrics form, and we're going to try to match and pair some more folks up this year. We've had several people in ag communications around the country start new programs this academic year who may not have been part of the mentor-mentee program too. So we'll try to get people matched up very soon. So with that, it is almost 4 o'clock my time. Thank you all for joining us, and I hope to see everybody this time next month. Bye.